Welcome to Cambridge Health Alliance Health is Well. My name is Roberta Robinson. I'm Director of Marketing and Outreach for the Geriatric Division of the Cambridge Health Alliance, including the PACE program. And today I'm excited to have with us Dr. Michael Payne. Dr. Payne is a gastroenterologist with Cambridge Health Alliance and an
assistant professor of medicine.
I
Thanks for
never
the
get that
promotion.
right.
It's okay. Assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School.
At Harvard Medical School. And so thank you for coming on board.
Thank you for having me.
So today, this is an incredibly important subject. And I think as I walk this highway of life, I'm becoming more aware of how incredibly important this subject is. And this subject takes us from here to here. Right?
From mouth to anus, yeah.
All
We're going to talk
between.
a little bit about the gastrointestinal tract.
Which is what?
Well, the gastrointestinal tract is basically that part of our body which is responsible for turning other life forms into us. You know, you take a tree baby, like an apple, or a part of an animal, like a slice of bacon, and you put that in this hole in your head, and this magic occurs where the amino acids, the fatty acids, the carbohydrates that are in those pieces of flesh are converted into you. They're your amino acids now. You ate them and you get to keep them. This process also allows you to eliminate waste and handle both solids, liquids, and gas, which are all normal components, because we humans are a lot like donuts. We have this really long donut hole that goes from here, from the mouth, all the way down to your anus. And each part of the gastrointestinal tract plays a different role in terms of helping that process. Now, the problem that we have is that, like any machine or like any sophisticated mechanism, things break down. And they break down in the most inconvenient way possible. I know other people from our organization have been here to speak about specific concerns such as peptic ulcer disease, such as colorectal cancer, and we'll touch briefly on that, but I'm going to give you a quick Disney World ride through the gut.
Okay.
All right, so
this is important. This is important for all of us.
First off, if you took the intestinal tract, the GI tract, out of the human body and stretch it, which actually an artist once did, they made a sculpture, and it was people running out of the room screaming. I went in and said, "This is wonderful," so I have a slide of this for my students. It stretches about 35, 36 feet.
35 to
Yep.
46 feet.
And in many ways, it's almost like a separate life form that we developed to deal with. You know, it basically said, if you take me around town, I'll absorb food for you. And we said, got it. And the reason I say that is the intestinal tract, the GI tract, has as many nerve cells as your spinal column. It has as much lymphatic tissue, immune tissue, as your spleen. It basically has its own way of moving. I mean, if it wasn't inside of you, it would slither along just like a worm on the sidewalk. But
Isn't that incredible?
Oh,
Isn't that incredible?
It gets even more interesting. We talk about organ systems like the lungs and the heart and the neurological system. Well, they're now beginning to say the extra system, which is the stuff that's in your colon. We'd been chatting a bit before we started about colonics and how I'm not a great fan of them unless they're for specific medicinal purposes. And the reason is that the stool that is in your colon is supposed to be there to an extent. You are made out of about 1 trillion cells, but you have about 9 trillion bacteria and organisms, viruses, parasites, that live inside your intestinal tract, most of whom live in the colon.
They're not all bad.
No, in fact, most of them they're sort of like, well, if you consider your GI tract to be an ecosphere, like the Earth, most of the colonic bacteria are like farmers and people living, in a tropical climate. They're, in tune with the environment. In fact, the bacteria in your colon manufacture folic acid, which we need. They help manufacture or help the production of vitamin K, which you need.
Which we need.
If you're a colonocyte, you're one of the cells in the colon, you get most of your nutrition not from the bloodstream, but from the stool going by. I mean, if you're working on an assembly line with the tastiest food on earth, why are you going to get up and walk to the cafeteria? Those cells take nutrition right from the fecal stream. Now, our brains were designed not to really enjoy fecal material because you don't want us to eat it because it carries a lot of diseases. So unlike many of our pets, we have a real aversion to the sight and the smell of this material, and that's from an evolutionary standpoint. But it doesn't mean that it's bad. in the right proportions and the right amount. So when the gut's functioning properly, you eat food, the food goes through you, you absorb what you need, anything you don't need gets dumped through the colon. The colon takes back the liquid that your body invested in getting that food through you. You make about a liter of saliva a day, about a liter of stomach fluid.
So a liter would be like a quart?
Yeah, a couple of quarts.
A couple.
Actually, I think it's a little bit more than a couple of quarts, but I had to pull my cell phone out to do the conversion. You also manufacture juice from your gallbladder, pancreatic juice, all of which help turn other life into you. Your intestine's one of the most destructive things in the known world. It literally is like a Star Trek blaster. It breaks proteins. If you had a hamburger, that's cow muscle. Your intestinal tract breaks that muscle down into its component amino acids and then allows the body to slurp them up. So you can take a cow muscle or a piece of a tree, like an apple, and turn that into a liquid soup that can be absorbed basically like a sponge.
So we kind of puree it?
Oh, we do a lot more than puree it. And once that material is absorbed, anything that's left over that the body doesn't want, like fiber, which is indigestible material, goes through the colon, and the colon sucks back all the water you put in so that you have those nice, beautiful, Lincoln log-like stools that people love to have. The intestinal tract's also very smart. It knows how quickly this process takes. And on average, it takes about 3 days for food to go from here out. Now, in that 3 days, about 2.5 days are spent in the colon getting the water back. Diseases can interrupt that process, and they can cause things to go the wrong way. Reflux disease, which is where stuff goes from the stomach up, or nausea and vomiting, where it goes from the stomach out. And this is where medicine gets to be really interesting. One of the first stops from biting food and these pieces of calcium stones basically embedded on our head, which we call teeth, which grind it into small pieces, is the esophagus. And that's basically like the Big Dig. It's just a channel from your mouth to your stomach.
Right.
It takes about 6 seconds for food to go from here to here, unless something's wrong with the muscle or there's an obstruction. If that's the case, then we do techniques like endoscopy, where we take a scope that's attached to a TV camera and we place it down your esophagus and look and see what's going on. Once it gets into the stomach, food is marinated in an acid bath, about one normal hydrochloric acid, which is strong enough to eat a hole through this floor, literally. Now, your stomach has a Teflon coating, which is basically made out of mucus, that protects it from autodigestion, from destroying itself. But like anything, you can break it, and that acid can burn areas which are exposed. For example, if you wear that Teflon, I don't know if you've ever had those pots, and when I was a kid, I wore the Teflon off of one using a copper scrubber, which my mother wasn't very happy about. You can do the same thing in your stomach to that Teflon lining, to that mucus. And the most common way that happens is by using aspirin or a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agent like Motrin or Advil.
Which will eat the stomach wall?
Well, it wears away the Teflon lining. It keeps the mucus from being formed.
So is that when we get an ulcer?
In fact, the aspirin can cause, if you look at a person's stomach who's ingested an aspirin, right after they ingested it, it's almost like a cigarette burn. Which is why when people take 81 milligrams of aspirin a day, I suggest they use chewable aspirin and then brush their teeth afterwards, and swallow it, because you break it into smaller pieces so it does less damage. Now the stomach and the...
That's good to know, for there are a lot of people out here taking 81 milligrams of aspirin a day for heart.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful drug, one of the best drugs ever invented.
Is that a baby aspirin?
That's a baby aspirin. It can be a little tough on the stomach, but your stomach's really smart and it's really tough. It replaces its lining every 2 days, so a little minor damage.
Every 2 days?
Every 2 days. It doesn't even bother you about. More major damage, however, that's an issue. So if you're taking 81 milligrams of aspirin, I usually recommend the chewable kind. Prefer to chew, but if not, not a problem. I don't recommend the coated kind, and the problem with the coated kind, it was a great marketing ploy. See, the aspirin won't cause ulcers in your stomach. Of course, the coating wears off, and guess where the ulcers get formed? Your small intestine or your colon. So
I know that well.
The problem is I can't reach with my endoscope easily into your small intestine. So if I'm going to have an ulcer, I'd rather have it in the stomach where we can find it. And incidentally, the stomach's pretty easy to treat.
So you have a duodenal, that's the small intestine.
Well, now we're going to the next room.
Oh.
So.
But then we have a peptic, isn't that higher?
Well, peptic just means acid. That's another term for acid.
Oh.
So if you make acid and that acid gets away from the stomach, I mean, I don't know if you've ever carried water and you managed to slosh some of it, you know, you're trying to carry the pot to the next room and it's sloshed on the carpet or sloshed on the sink. Well, the same thing happens here. You make acid in your stomach and it's supposed to stay in the stomach, but sometimes that acid sloshes upstream or downstream. If it goes upstream, that's where you get heartburn, reflux disease.
Oh, we all know that. That's very prevalent out
GERD,
here.
absolutely. Part of it's because there's a muscle that closes the esophagus called the lower esophageal sphincter. And it's a really smart muscle. See, the gut's smart. It's just about as smart as we are. So you swallow and the food goes down and this thing opens sesames to let the food go into the stomach. And you can hear it with a stethoscope go plunk. And then the muscle closes up to keep that acid from coming back. And the problem is, as we get older, my mom says, as you get older, things get lower and hairier, but they also get a little weaker. And what happens is that muscle weakens up a little bit, and the acid can kind of splosh upstream. This stomach has a coating. The esophagus does not. And so you get that acid spilled here or up here, it's going to cause problems. It'll hurt. It'll cause heartburn. It can cause ulcers, and in some cases, it can even lead to forming precancerous tissue called Barrett's esophagitis.
In the esophagus.
In the esophagus.
Oh.
So the tube that's designed.
So you can have an ulcer in the esophagus? I never knew that.
The tube designed to just carry food here to here gets damaged because its next door neighbor is a toxic waste site.
Right.
Now, you mentioned duodenal ulcers connecting to the stomach, and the stomach basically, people think, oh, I digest food in the stomach. No, you don't. The stomach's, it's a lunch bag. It's designed to hold the food, which is why it needs to marinate in acid to keep bacteria from eating it. It holds that food for about 2-3 hours and then breaks off little pinches to let go into the duodenum, the small intestine. Because the small intestine is very finicky and it's working hard to absorb food. And if you send too much food into the small intestine will be like a client at a really expensive restaurant and say, take it back, I don't want it. And it's really effective at doing it. And that's what we call nausea and vomiting. Small intestine communicates to the brain, this is no good, send it back. And the brain basically converts you into a squirt gun. The stomach contracts, the valve opens, and you send the stuff back. That's a protective mechanism. In the ancient days when our species was young and roadkill was our primary food source, every now and then we would eat something that even our intestine would say, no, we can't, you need to get rid of this now. Which is why you have this protective reflex, which is what happens when you get food poisoning. The bacteria trigger your gut to protect you from a serious infection, and that's why they send everything back, sometimes for a couple of days.
Immediately.
It depends on which bacteria and what situation, but it's not pleasant. And that's why when you have that, you can't obviously put things down, they come back. I mean, we try to get fluids in you as best we can, but if it's really bad, we put an intravenous line in and we feed you directly into your vein long enough to let this heal. And that's food poisoning. So we get through the stomach, we get into the duodenum. The stomach is pinching off little pieces to go into the duodenum, but the problem is that acid goes down into the duodenum too. And that acid, as we said, can eat a hole through this floor. And that's where duodenal ulcers occur. Again, the duodenum doesn't have any protective covering, only the stomach does. So you get an ulcer down there, you got a problem. And the way the small intestine gets rid of the acid is it injects bicarbonate directly, baking soda, well, not baking soda, but similar chemical, directly into the small intestine. And the organ that does that is this flat organ that's about the size of your hand that sits right here. It's behind your stomach, and it's called the pancreas. So the pancreas does two things. It injects bicarbonate to get rid of acid.
To neutralize?
Exactly. And that's part of the problem with ulcers. Most duodenal ulcers occur upstream from the connection point.
Oh.
So the
They're
antacids.
missing out on that.
Exactly, and that's why most ulcers are in the first part of the duodenum, because the connection point is at the third part. It's a little about 3-4 centimeters down. And so if you're upstream, you're getting that acid and not as much relief. The other thing the pancreas does is it actually produces the chemical that destroys life. I mean, it converts, if you were one of those murder mysteries and you want to destroy the body, get pancreatic juice and put the body in it, and it'll dissolve everything but the hair and the bones.
Really?
That is the juice that is responsible for converting protein and carbohydrates and fats into their component parts so you can absorb them. So the pancreas is a really powerful organ, which is why the body has the stomach in front of it and the spinal column behind it to protect it. Because if you injure your pancreas, you get something called pancreatitis.
Oh, inflammation.
Inflammation of the pancreas.
Yes.
And the problem with it is that this is where you make the chemicals that destroy tissue, life, so that you can absorb them. They don't have a brain. They can't tell the difference between you and the hamburger you ate. So they're very carefully packaged by the body to be injected into the small intestine when food comes by. If you damage the pancreas and the fluid escapes, it'll digest the pancreas and every organ around it, which is why pancreatitis is such a really, really dangerous disease. Now the body
Is it treated with antibiotics?
if it gets to the point where infections occur, but the most important thing, it's sort of like having a fire in the body, and what the body does is it sends natural firefighters to kind of neutralize these enzymes, the chemicals that do this damage, antitrypsin and other enzymes which are designed to kind of stop the damage.
It sounds painful though.
Oh, it's very painful, and it's also, if untreated, very dangerous, which is why we give people plenty of fluids to kind of let those chemicals get to the pancreas. We put the pancreas at rest, we don't let you eat, and we wait for it to heal, which can take a week or more depending on how severe the damage is. Usually you need to be in hospital for a few days if this happens to you. We call that acute pancreatitis. Most common causes are, by the way, alcohol and gallstones, which is why we really don't like when people drink too much being defined as more than about 2 average size beers or glasses of wine or shots of liquor for somebody my size and weight.
A day.
Yeah, more than that, don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yeah. So, so the pancreas.
Yeah.
Isn't that where insulin?
That's correct. Like most places, you know, the body's no different. You got to do double duty. It's got 2 jobs. You know, it's got its regular job, digestion, and it got a part-time job. The cells that manufacture insulin live there. You know, they pay rent, and so they manufacture insulin so your body can absorb sugars. Eating sugar doesn't give you diabetes. The inability for your cells to absorb the sugar is what gives you diabetes. The insulin acts like, you know those fancy hotels, they have doormen and doorwomen who open the doors? That's what insulin does. It opens the door to the cell to let the sugar in. No, if the insulin's on strike, the sugar stays in the bloodstream and the cells are literally starving. The problem with having the cells, you know, they should have gotten a better place to live in the pancreas, is that the pancreas gets damaged by pancreatitis. Well, if it's severe enough, you can also have diabetes.
Right. And that also is very prevalent out here.
Unfortunately. Well, there are different reasons for diabetes. This is one. The most common cause of diabetes is type 2, which is your pancreas isn't manufacturing enough insulin for the increased body that you have because your digestive tract works so well. In other words, obesity is more a cause of diabetes that we see, and there are other reasons. Diseases where the immune system attacks the
is that
cells.
called the autoimmune? I read that today, as a matter of fact.
Well, good.
But I wasn't doing research. It just happened to come across my email.
Well, that's because medicine is fascinating. We love to talk about it. Autoimmune simply means that the police officers of the body are like police anywhere, and occasionally they make mistakes. Sometimes they're minor mistakes, sometimes they're major mistakes. Diabetes type 1, childhood diabetes, is where the immune system, for reasons no one clearly understands, attack the cells, the beta cells in the pancreas that manufacture insulin. They just go after them.
So that it gets destroyed.
Yeah, they profile beta cells and attack them, and they're destroyed, so you don't have any cells to manufacture insulin. What you mentioned was called autoimmune pancreatitis, which is that the immune system, again for reasons no one clearly understands, just decides it's going to destroy the pancreas. Autoimmune diseases are really dangerous, and there's so many of them. Multiple sclerosis, the immune system attacks your nerves. Uh, Autoimmune pancreatitis.
Is lupus an autoimmune?
Lupus is an autoimmune disease where the immune system attacks connective tissue. Eczema, the immune system attacks your skin. You name the organ, there's an autoimmune disease. Ulcerative colitis, which is downstream in the intestinal tract, is where the immune system attacks the colon. Crohn's disease, the immune system attacks the intestinal tract. And again, we don't know why it does this, but when it does, it's literally like having the Gestapo come in and shoot everybody who's wearing,
The good guys.
well, a red tie. Yeah. And it's like, why are you doing that? It's like, well, we were told to. By who? Well, we don't know, but bad. And so autoimmune diseases will target specific tissues. And that in and of itself is an entire branch of medicine. But in the GI tract, you can have autoimmune gastritis, pernicious anemia.
Oh, pernicious anemia.
Which is caused...
I knew someone that had that one.
It's not a great disease. And what happens is cells that help manufacture the chemical that absorb or vitamin B12 are destroyed or damaged. And so you can have problems associated with the loss of these cells that cause an anemia. There also, you see an increased risk of cancer in many of these autoimmune diseases because if you beat up on the body long enough, it's going to get ticked. And when it does, things like cancer pop up. You have autoimmune pancreatitis. You can have autoimmune diseases that affect the small intestine, like a perfectly harmless chemical that we live off of, gliadin, which is found in wheat, can trigger an autoimmune response called celiac sprue.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And what's happening is the immune system is going after your small intestine. And the small intestine's where you absorb food. Its major function, when you look at the small intestine, it's absolutely beautiful in the real world when you do a capsule endoscopy or you look through an endoscopy. You see these little villi. They're finger-like projections that come out of the lining of the intestine, and they look like coral, and they absorb nutrients right from the fluid in the intestine. And those finger-like projections are attacked and destroyed by the immune reaction in celiac disease, and so as a result,
they're not doing their job.
Which leads to diarrhea and can lead to malabsorption of important chemicals, which can lead to severe illness. People died from this in the past.
Wow.
Now, celiac disease is a very specific illness, and we can test for it through biopsies or chemical tests, but it's also become very popular, and so a lot of people stop eating gliadin because they think, and for some people it probably does play a role, maybe not autoimmune disease, but maybe some form of mild allergic problem. For other people, there is always placebo effect because it's the disease sort of the month.
It's true, it's very popular now. I just want to alert
Sure.
you, I don't know where we are and where we're going with this, but this is all very interesting. A lot of this I never heard, but that's why we do the show. But we have about 4 more minutes, so I don't know what else you...
Well, we got through the small bowel, let's hit to the colon.
Okay.
Okay, so food gets to the colon, and it sits there while the body literally does like a dehydrator to turn it into a solid pellet. Now, obviously, if you damage the colon, you don't get that solid pellet, and that's where we get to diarrhea. Either too much stuff going through can cause diarrhea, or damage to the colon or rectum itself, or the rectal valve, the valve which allows you to hold on to what's inside your colon. Now that valve down at the anus, the rectal valve, really smart. It can tell the difference between solid, liquid, and gas, unless it gets damaged, in which case sometimes that's a problem. Diarrhea.
Where you might get some incontinence or something like that.
Incontinence or just plain ordinary diarrhea. Diarrhea can be caused by a number of things: damage to the colon from an infection, from an autoimmune disease like ulcerative colitis. It can be caused by eating the wrong thing. Milk product, for example. Most of the planetary population of humans, there's a gene that tells your intestines stop manufacturing the enzyme that digests lactose, which happens around age 8, 9, 10, because Mother Nature figured you should have weaned by then.
To everybody?
Well, no, there are mutations that occurred, and those mutations had children who are of Northern European ancestry and also Bantu ancestry. These are both groups that herded milk-bearing animals for centuries, so they don't lose this ability. Most of the rest of us do. Doesn't mean you can't drink milk. The sugar goes through you harmlessly. It's just those bacteria we were talking about, they really love sugar. It's like a luau. And when bacteria go to the bathroom, they make gas. And when you have a tube that is open on one end, closed on the other, and you have rapidly expanding gas, we call that a cannon, and that's what lactose deficiency or lactase deficiency can lead to, severe diarrhea.
Lactose intolerance is
That's
what we might
exactly
know.
what we're talking about. And the trick is just reduce the lactose amount. You can do that by buying milk which has had the lactose treated before you eat it. Or
Like
you
the
can
lactate?
Lactate, which
Yeah.
I live off of. Very common in African Americans. Or you can get the tablets which contain the enzyme, and you take it with the food. It sits in your stomach and helps pre-digest it so you don't get this problem, or at least not as badly. As I said,
Gas is very uncomfortable.
oh yes, your intestine, I can cut a polyp off with a cautery device and you won't blink an eye, won't even feel it. I can, slice the inside of the intestine with a needle knife and you won't feel it. But if I blow your intestine up like a balloon, boy, are you going to feel it. The intestine doesn't like gas, which incidentally everybody has, which incidentally the average time, not that you asked, but the average number of passages of gas in a human being is between about 15 to 30 in a day. People who eat higher fiber foods have more gas, but it tends to be less odoriferous, is the word. And people who love to have their burgers, you really don't want to be in the elevator with them. Gas is normal, but if it gets to the point where it's causing pain, then often it means that there's something else going on. And by the way, last thing I want to say is we assume we know what's going on in our bodies. We don't. And the reason is that our skin is a brilliant organ. You have thousands of neurons per square centimeter of skin that can tell you in the middle of the night, I'm being bitten by a mosquito on my right leg. And you look at your hand and there's blood on it and you nailed it without even looking. Your intestine has one major nerve, the vagus, that comes down from the brain and supplies the gallbladder, the stomach, the heart, the small bowel, the large bowel. So when you feel something, I have nausea and when the person comes in and says, I'm having nausea and I'm sweaty and I think I'm having a stomach problem. And they say, you look awful pale. No, I was nauseated and I vomited. It's my stomach. No, it's your heart. You just think it's your stomach. Or the person comes in saying, I'm having a heart attack. I've got this burning sensation. It's like, no, it's reflux disease. So that is why people like me have a living, because we help divine what these things make. And that's a quick trip to the GI tract.
There we are. Well, we are out of time, and thank you so much. I think we could do another show to continue more of this interesting information that I don't think, certainly at the level of detail that I never knew, and I'm sure other people didn't either. So thank you so much for coming on board.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you next time.